welcome. My name is Barrett Swanson, and I'm an assistant professor of creative writing here at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and I serve as co-curator of the Warhawk reading series, which is a once a semester reading series where my colleague Nicholas Gulig and I invite either a poet, a fiction writer, or an essayist to come in and speak with our students and read from their work. Each year we try to choose the most exciting and electric young writers that we can think of who are at the start or toward the start of a very promising career. I'm just going to remind everyone to please mute your microphones before we jump in here. I'm also wanted to remind you that next semester we will have Jesse McCarthy, the essayist Jesse McCarthy, who has a new book out called Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul. And we will also be hearing from Rachel Poser, who is the Sunday Review editor at the New York Times. So we can look forward to that. But tonight we are incredibly lucky to have the exceptional poet Jane Wong, whose new book, How Not to Be Afraid of Everything, I read with extreme delight, and also hoping that it would indeed tell me how not to be afraid of everything. But alas, it offered me much more. Without further ado, I'm going to yield the floor and hand off the mic to our wonderful student, Hannah, who will be doing a more formal introduction of Jane.
Thanks, Barrett. Okay. Theodore Adorno once said, "There can be no poetry after Auschwitz." If this rings true to this day, after all that has happened this year, we can say that there can be no poetry after Atlanta, where 6 Korean women were brutally murdered at a racially fueled spa shooting. We can say that there can be no poetry after the Philippines, where the government pardoned the murderer of a Filipina trans woman because he was a white Marine. We can say that there can be no poetry after George Floyd, after Breonna Taylor, after Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Errol Chang. Adorno says there can be no poetry after Auschwitz, because poetry, specifically the lyric, gives out under the weight of these atrocities. And for the longest time, I have mourned this failure, all the limitations of the medium, and expressing the cataclysmic in my life. I have mourned the fact that there can be no poetry after my family's immediate dislocation from the Philippines to the Midwest, my psyche's perpetual non-immigration, and the presence of my personal diasporic ghosts that have crossed the Pacific to haunt me. And eventually, the mourning evolved into a rage that is birthed from a place of incessant dissatisfaction towards systems of oppression, injustice, and violence. I am grateful to find Jane Wong's book at a time of anger-filled reckoning, a collection of lyrics that convinces me that there can, in the forever aftermaths of our accumulated atrocities, still be poetry. How to Not Be Afraid of Everything is a collection of poems that are written in graceful indignation, a calculated fury that is reflected in the language. In the long labors, she writes, I, daughter of long labors, I, knock off half-price guilt, I, impossible imposter, big words, trying to prove what? And when you died, she writes, air, this yawning gap between us all. The more things change, what remains the same? In What I Tell Myself Before I Sleep, she says, must we crawl across the floor just to see the world from a different angle? In Lessons and Lessening, she writes, I lay against my floor, if only to feel that kind of affection. In all of these pieces, Jane Wong grapples for liberation, and with the careful calibration of poetics, does it gracefully so. And as we read, and as she reads, we are invited to take part in this lament, to outwardly rage and not be afraid. For centuries, silence has protected my family. It was our only salvation. I was raised to not talk back, to take tyranny in without protest, and immigration has exacerbated the silence that it has become a lifeline at which I live under the mercy of. Reading Jane Wong's poetry during such a radical time in history, I have realized that we owe each other the fullness of our political catharsis. We all owe each other the entirety of our militant expression, even though there can be no poetry after Auschwitz. There can always be rage after, after, after. Jane Wong is an associate professor of creative writing at Western Washington University. She holds an M.F.A. in poetry from the University of Iowa and a Ph.D. in English from the University of Washington. Her poems can be found in more places than I can name. A Kundiman Fellow, she's also the recipient of a Pushcart Prize in fellowships and residencies from the U.S. Fulbright Program, Artist Trust, Harvard's Woodberry Poetry Room, For Culture, the Fine Arts Work Center, Loaf, Hedgebrook, Willapa Bay, the Jentel Foundation, SAFTA, Mineral School, the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund, and others. She is the author of the wonderful book, How to Not Be Afraid of Everything from Alice James Books, 2021, and Overpour from Action Books. And her first collection of essays, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, will be released from Tin House in 2023. So please join me in welcoming Jane Wong.
Oh my gosh, Anna, that was so utterly beautiful. I'm still kind of like seeping your words in, and your introduction just felt like a poem essay in itself. So I'm just a lot of gratitude to you, and also sharing your experience too in your own poetry. It felt like in that intro. So and thank you all so much for being here and for reading these poems. You know, for all of you who are writers, it always feels kind of like a shock to the system that anyone reads your work. So I'm still kind of like, what, really? But thank you so much. And you know, Nick is such an old friend of mine, one of my trusted readers, and I'm just honored to return back to Wisconsin-Whitewater. Not in the flesh this time. I feel like last time I was very much there in person, but I'm still really glad to be in community with you all. I'm going to read some poems, and we'll hopefully screen share some kind of like visual background as I read a couple of the poems. And then, yeah, I think we'll open it up to whatever you all would want to talk about. So yeah, thank you so much again, Hannah, for that beautiful introduction. I know we've been kind of, you know, sharing emails about the poetics of haunting too, and thinking about ghosts. And so much of this book, you know, I was thinking, you know, Barrett, you were talking about like, you know, the advice of what does this mean to not be afraid of everything, and the fact that this book makes like you afraid, like it's just like the opposite. I offer no advice, you know, and I was thinking a lot about fear on multiple levels, but also rage. I feel like rage is so tied to fear, and I'm thinking about the ways in which I'm fearful of those who are angry at me, and then angry at those who fear me. And so it's just like this constant like cycle. And even thinking too, Hannah, in your introduction, thinking about honoring those who have been murdered, right? And thinking about hate, and thinking about systemic racism, and thinking about all these things that can really surround you with a cloud of fear. But again, I kind of can't help but rage in all of that fear. So I'm going to start by reading the very first poem of the book, which is called Mad. I purposely wanted to begin this book with anger and with rage. And so it's called Mad. It's written in the style of Mad Libs, but you can kind of fill in the, I guess, the blanks, so to speak. And I was thinking specifically in terms of the murders in Atlanta, like how much rage I felt in my grief, and that all swirls together, and the expectation too, as someone who, you know, is is Asian American and is a woman to be expected not to be angry, expected to be silent, to just be pleasant and okay with things. And so I really wanted to start with rage. So this is mad. Jane, deceived by time and again, should not, but she, and slept with curled fists. The rat catching a ride on the turtle winds, ugly and coarse, but beware of strangers who, and win your, and lick the sweat off your nose in false, just to taste their own. Do not trust in owls and heads that spin. Heads should not spin nor stink like ammonia in the armpits, like a habit of. Do not pause to watch insects like dangling lights. Their soft speckled bodies and minutia of buzzing dandelion seeds have already you in the neck. Blood on their spindle tongues. This is a metaphor for. There are no wolves in this tale, only handsome with pea green eyes who will tell you you're as soft as. Then they will carefully cut and seek only the smallest kindness of shaking out a pebble from a neighbor's shoe to do unto others what you, did you swallow? Jane, called intense, surely head spun, owl struck, stating if only she, called feisty, talks to, often too smart for, good, I never thought you'd be looking like, you have big eyes for a, curiously strong or weak, or it's just, and it's for the best. Her hair, though, is the best and is remarkably like kindling and okay for, to touch, light, ingest, inflame strands by. Ignore when she says, or this is of Jane. Jane rubs salt all over her body to become a dissolving, and thusly, rightfully so, right out of this world. So that's my rage. I wanted to read another poem that maybe kind of, I don't know, continues with the rage theme, I suppose, but has a bit more in there, and thinking about the ways in which rage to me also lends itself to a sense of connection. I think about rage as being something so different when you're alone enraged and enraged with community, or at least the hope of community. By the end of the book, there's so much that I think the elegies start turning into odes of sorts. And so, yeah, just thinking about that. But in thinking about the title of the book, How to Not Be Afraid of Everything, I was going to read that title poem, and then I was going to read this poem, Everything, which, you know, I really have to give a shout out to my poet friend Chen Chen. In his poem in Noisy Mouthfuls, he ends that poem with, you know, his list of everything that he writes about. And in many ways, I kind of knew I had to write the everything poem, which is a great prompt too. It's something I give my students, is like, what are the things that you constantly come back to as a poet? And, you know, this idea of constantly having to write about something new is, to me, kind of problematic. It's, you know, you have these things that you circle around, and sometimes you don't even know you circle around for a reason. It's the stuff that haunts you. So for me, the poem Everything is about haunting. But I'll read the title poem, How to Not Be Afraid of Everything, first, and then I'll read Everything. How to Not Be Afraid of Everything. How to not punch everyone in the face. How to not protect everyone's eyes from my own punch. I've been practicing my punch for years, loosening my limbs. My jaw unhinged creates a felony I refuse to go to court for. The fat of spam pools in the sun, reminding me of my true feelings. My feelings leak from my ear like a bad cold in a bad storm. Stars huddle in a corner, little radiators sweating out their fear. An opossum reaches his arm up from a porch. I hold onto his arm for a little while, for a little warmth. At night, my subterranean eye begins to rove. Song of the underground, song of the rat tribe. I see my mother in an apron splattered with viscera I will eat for dinner. To gut her workout, to work her guts out. Can we talk about privilege? Can I say I always look behind me? I always look behind me. I always take a step forward like I'm about to save myself from toppling over. The bare bones of it. Some of us know that spoiled meat still counts as protein, that the horse's neck snaps from the weight of what we give it to carry. I bundle up a sack of clouds, empty of rain and fear and lightning. That poem, in many ways, I think it actually really also echoes to me growing up in a restaurant as well. So this book also really kind of dives into nourishment too, and the lack thereof at times, and the ways in which I grew up in gluttony, but come from a history of hunger, which is also something I'm afraid of. You know, what is the history you don't know? What is the history that goes silenced? And even just thinking about my mom splattered in that apron with viscera we will eat, and to work her guts out, to gut her workout. This book also is a lot about labor. I keep thinking about that, you know, especially as someone who's, you know, first gen college grad, first gen actually high school grad. And in being a professor, I feel a lot of weird feelings to have gotten where I am. And I mean, I'll read Long Labors too later, but this is everything. Everything. I am the type to go to bed with my feet dirty. A man calling from a balcony is not to be trusted. In 1988, the nation sings a song I can't understand, but I sing it because everyone looks at me like a thief and no one likes a thief. Algae gathers in plastic cups along the Jersey shore. The dull prongs of a fork still count as a weapon. I gather plastic cups along the shore and shake them out to use for tea, juice, a home for my toothbrush. The Pledge of Allegiance is a building ledge, an alleged crime, a leg crossed over another leg, a plea gone askew, a glance shared in a room with someone else who looks like you. Hundreds of toxic wild boars are roaming across northern Japan, and it would be a mistake to identify with them. In 1960, my grandmother holds no knife in no tall wheat. When washing her feet, my grandmother tells me she spent decades without shoes, wonders if the mud misses her. I am a good daughter, and I can repeat this indefinitely without ever taking a breath. Often, I call out to myself just to hear an echo, to hear something moving in the walls like a healthy family of rats. My mother has been told repeatedly, you can't walk here. Here is a white stone, a white fence, a white seagull, a white jug of milk, a white candle, a white duvet, a white patio, a white bar of soap to wash your mouth out. Sometimes I dream in Cantonese and I have no idea what is being said. You grow to love what you create, pouring out of your mouth. In 1988, my father sees his reflection in a rearview mirror and identifies with a blood moon lighting his way to Atlantic City. From a balcony, a man yells at me, "You need some white dick," and I turn into a boar. My father disappears for weeks and my mother keeps weeding the garden, pulling cigarettes from the splintering tomatoes I will devour. I study asymptotes for months and dream in curves, almost but never touching. My mother writes in her English diary for night school, I hate him, I hate him, I hate him, I hate him, and her ESL teacher only gives her a check, so I give her a check plus. To be a good daughter means to carry everything with you at all times, the luggage of the past lifted to the mouth. When we look at each other, my mother laughs like an overripe tomato on a windowsill. In 1989, I spent months assembling a puzzle map of the United States of America, and the teacher said, "Good job, Jane." And then louder and slower like a drowning sloth, "Good job, Jane." And I did not touch a single piece. Bloody drunk in a blood moon, my father fights with another gambler and jabs at his arm with a dull fork, and they laugh both celestially. During elementary school, I did not say a single word, not even when called on, and thus the teachers and administrators decided I could not speak English because they looked at me. Mao Zedong explains math. In math, I just drew a picture of an egg. That was enough geometry for me. My grandfather was jailed by the Red Army sometime between 1966 and 1976, and my mother says I saw him cry when I tried to visit. He wanted to eat the bao I made for him. Algae gathers, gleaming like a jewel, on the head of my 5th grade betta fish. Counter-revolutionaries during the Cultural Revolution are likened to finding a bone inside an egg. I was born healthy in the year of the rat. The man on the balcony invests in a foldable set of 2 chairs and 1 table in eggshell white, mold resistant, perfect for outdoor use. I was 10 when I willed a rock to fall off a ledge just by staring at it long enough. So thanks for listening to that one. I'm going to screen share and hopefully this works. I'm going to try something new and I'm just gonna see what will happen. 1 second. I heard that this can happen, so it might just take me a second. Are you all with me? Okay. I don't know where it is. All right, never mind. Just give me 1 more second. I promise you, if it works, it's going to be the very best thing. If it doesn't work, I will be a little sad, but that's okay. Where is it? No. Oh, okay, I found it. Okay, here goes. That's a horrible sound. I keep forgetting these things are recorded and just talking to myself, right? Okay. Did it happen? Can you see me inside of a PowerPoint? I mean, I just love it. Okay. I'm just gonna read 2 more poems and then I'm really excited to chat with you all. Yeah, just whatever's on your mind, questions and conversations. So thanks for listening. Yeah, so I'm gonna read a couple last poems. They are literally the last poems of the book. Right here, I'm in this space of my Fry show, actually. 2019, I had the opportunity to work with the Fry Art Museum in Seattle to actually turn my poem, After Preparing to Alter the Ghost Space Feverishly, into a sculptural work. And so what you see here, you can't see it because of this particular photo, but you would be able to, in the gallery show, walk around the bowls, and inside the bowls there's going to be lines of the poem. So the poem actually never ends when you go to this particular show. It's like it just keeps circling, and I wanted this chandelier of thank you bags, thinking about growing up in a restaurant, and they're full of oranges and flowers, and just thinking about kind of nourishment, and again, my history of hunger. My family, or I should say not all of my family, survived the Great Leap Forward, which was an industrialized campaign, during Mao Zedong's time. This is right before the Cultural Revolution, which my mom was born at the very beginning of the Cultural Revolution, and 36 million people starved during this time, and it is censored in China, and it's oftentimes a history that is not spoken about and taught. And I will say I did not know about it. My family does not talk about it. We just say that, family members disappeared, like no one says why, though it makes a lot of sense now if you kind of look at the kind of history tied to the dates in terms of my grandfather's siblings and his parents. He was orphaned. most likely, right? I mean, they starved. I mean, my family does not use that word. They don't speak about it, but it is what happens. And a lot of the poems in the book, you know, and thinking about what I'm afraid of is really kind of that history. And, you know, I was in college when I took a Chinese politics class. And in the documentary our professor was showing, there was this tiny clip about the Great Leap Forward. And it just like, it was like no longer school, like something just like kind of broke within me. And I left class and I didn't come back for a while. And I realized, like, you know, this is my history, and I didn't know it. And so, you know, even thinking about, you know, what Hannah shared at the opening with the intro, like there's so many things that haunt us and our families and our lineages, and the things that are constantly, you know, present dangers, but also past dangers that stay with me. So that's a long preface. I don't usually say long prefaces, but you know, I think it's helpful to have context for this poem, which is again a lot of the poems in the book I write to my family that starved, and this is their answer to me, to my epistolary poems. They basically just want to have a party and want to eat. So here we go. From within the PowerPoint. After preparing the altar, the ghosts feast feverishly. It begins with a quote from the incredible poet and activist Audre Lorde: "How hard it is to sleep in the middle of a life." We wake in the middle of a life hungry. We smear durian along our mouths, sing soft death a lullaby, carcass breath, arrows of licked fingers, and the finest perfume. What is love if not rot? We wear the fruit's hull as a spiked crown, grinning in green armor, death to the grub, fat in its milky shuffle, death to the lawlessness of dirt, death to mud and its false chocolate. To the bloated sun, we want to slice open and yoke all over the village. We want a sun-drenched slug feast, an omelet loosening its folds like hot jello. We want the marbled fat of steak and all its swirling pink galaxies. We want the drool, the gnash, the pluck of each corn kernel, raw and summer swell, tears welling up oil. Order up pickled cucumbers piled like logs for a fire, like fat limbs we pepper and succulent in. Order up shrimp chips curling in a porcelain bowl like subway seats, grapes peeling from bitter bark, almost translucent like eyes we would rather see. Little girl, what do you leave, leaven, in your sight? Death to the open eyes of the dying. Here there are so many open eyes, we can't close each one. No, we did not say the steamed eye of a fish, no eyelids fluttering like no butterfly wings, no purple yam lips. We said eyes, still and resolute as a heartbreaker. Does this break your heart? Look, we don't want to be rude, but we want seconds, please. Want globes of oranges swallowed whole like a basketball, or Mars, or whatever planet is the most delicious. Slather Saturn, ferment Mercury, lap up its film of dusk. Seconds, thirds, fourths, meat wool, a bouquet of chicken feet, a garden of melons, monstrous in their bulge, prune back nothing. We purr in this garden. We comb through berries and come out so blue. Little girl, lasso tofu, the rope slicing its belly clean. Deep fry a cloud so it tastes like bitter gourd or your father leaving. The exhaust of his car charred. Serenade a snake and slither its tongue into yours and bite. Love, what is love if not knotted in garlic? Child, we move through graves like eels, delicious with our heads first, our mouths agape, our teeth, little needles to stitch a factory of everything made in China. You ask, are you hungry? Hunger eats through the air like ozone. You ask, what does it mean to be rootless? Roots are good to use as toothpicks. You, how can you wake in the middle of a life? We shut and open our eyes like the sun shining on tossed pennies in a forgotten well, bald copper blood. Yu Choi bolts into rose roses down here. While you were sleeping, we woke to the leaves of your backyard shed and we ate that. And then we ate one of your lost flip-flops too. In a future life, we saw rats overtake a supermarket with so much milk, we turned opaque. We waked to something boiling. We waked to wash dirt from lettuce to blossom into your face, aphids along the lashes. Little girl, don't forget to take care of the chickens squawking in their mess and stench. Did our mouths buckle at the sight of you devouring slice after slice of pizza in the greasy box too? Does this frontier swoon for you? It's time to wake up. Wake the tapeworm who loves his home. Wake the ants, let them do-si-do a spoonful of peanut butter. Tell us, little girl, are you hungry, awake, astonished enough? I get thirsty from that one, so T, thank you for listening to that one. Okay, one more poem. Check out this. I just can't get over them like in it. So I'm gonna read from the second to last poem in the collection, The Long Labors. And thank you also, Hannah, for that shout out from that poem in your intro. And I just wanted to show you all, I've been doing a lot of experiments with other ways of writing lately, just because I kind of want to do things with my hands. Like right now, I'm like learning ceramics. And so I just make rice bowls all the time. Here's one. It's a raccoon eating a burger. I also make ceramic dumplings. But here, this is The Long Labors. As a poem, if you all see it in the book, it's super dense. Like it is a chunk. Like it is hard to read. It's exhausting. I won't read all of it, honestly, tonight, because I'm just like, it's a lot. But it's I can't show people. It's a chonker, and it doesn't have a lot of air, it doesn't have a lot of space, and I want it to feel that way because it's so exhausting. And thinking about labor, just the exhaustion of the chunk of the poem. And here I actually wanted to loosen the heaviness of the poem and break it into single lines and create kind of like something airier. And so the first version I did this was actually I cut out all the lines and I started folding them in these little like, I don't know, like little circles. And so I started making this like, this is the whole poem, Long Labors, but you can feel it's so different from the giant block that it is in the book. And for me, I wanted to give it that lightness because after so much labor, I just want to rest. And this poem for me feels like this resting. This was a precursor to my next version of this poem. I actually was folding these as these kind of like circles, but in many ways, it mimicked folding wontons. And so I kind of wanted to create that little like pucker at the top. You can see me holding the glue knife right there. But then if I keep going, I did another iteration of this. This is for a performance at UW-Bothell. And I cut out some of the words in the poem, The Long Labors, into rice paper. So you can see ginger, overtime, mouth, chew. And then here's some more close-ups of it. That's just a really delicious, like hydrated mushroom. So, and then I folded them into dumplings, those words. It was a pork and chive mixture, and I ate my own poem. So that was pretty cool. So I wanted to actually mimic the labor of me growing up in a restaurant. This is the chore I would do, my favorite chore, because my the worst chore was actually cleaning the goop out of the shrimp. But my favorite thing was to fold wontons at the restaurant. And so it was really fun to fold the poem into the dumplings and then eat it. So I just kind of wanted to show you that. And just like, for me lately, I've just been really drawn to doing something beyond the page. So I'm just gonna leave it with this delicious mushroom and read from The Long Labors. But thank you everyone for listening, and then we'll have conversation. So I won't read all of it because I will pass out probably. It's long for a reason. But okay, The Long Labors. My grandmother said it was going to be long as you can hold your lineage, depending on how long you can hold your tongue, as long as your tongue can wrap around the pit of some stolen stone fruit, as long as you can hide your pitter-patter face glued to sun-split splinters, lengthening shadows as long as your face longing to be mirrored back to your daughter, your mother, your grandmother, freckle by freckle, furnished forever across the long, looming hall. Collapsed in a pool of spit, my mouth over papers, raccoon doctorate, luxurious loser with thin branch fingers, no meat in the palm, no muscle in the bending. The farmer in me is atrophying. The cook, the factory seamstress, the clerk, the mother in me is pulling out. All that I come from, all that I owe to them. What is left of me? What is me? Professorial rat, black book levens and maddened in meetings, chewing at my desk on a frozen anything. Microwave spun and splattered on lessons, wondering who packaged this, who spooned this glacial sauce into this plastic hull, whose hands, whose daughter, does she look like me? Does she like dancing in the gloaming, funneled into my greedy mouth? I, daughter of long labors, I, knock off half-price guilt, I, impossible imposter, big words, trying to prove what and to whom. I wait to be seated at a restaurant. A white person enters and orders from me. I want sweet and sour chicken, but without bell peppers and brown rice, and I almost take it down. Who made this for you? Do you know the song that reminds them of home? Do you know to play the radio as loud as you can and roll down the windows and smack your cheeks 10 times in order to stay awake for the drive? Do you know who sewed on this button? Do you know the murmuring leg ache from standing all day, a tree for whom? Do you know who processed the letter you received today, fed it into a machine with paper cuts as wide as a river you could float in? Do you know how long you could hold your urine until your 15-minute break? The roiling pressure in the abdomen, the tick-tap of the feet, the hands, how much to tip the gas attendant in Jersey, how the smell sticks behind both earlobes, the temperature when flipping a walk, the oil burns, the white papered hat measuring salt at the brim, how your impatient face resembles a slowly rotting peach, worms in the snarl. Do you know the name of your fishmonger, the name of my uncle, the times he has snuck in to call to say he will be late picking up his daughter, fish scales glittered to his elbows like opera gloves? Do you know cuticles peeling white like flecks of cod after washing dishes? Do you know the smell of nail polish remover stinging bees in your nostrils? Do you know the back? How the back curls, how the back bridges, how the back puckers and crunches like packed snow no one else but you will shovel up. I look up how labor is used in a sentence, the obvious labor. Immigrants provided a source of cheap labor, negotiation between labor and management. Wants the vote of labor in the elections. The flood destroyed the labor of years. Industry needs labor for production. Anthropocene, capitalism, gentrification. What do these words mean and to whom? Helping my mother over the sink, I snipped the ends of long beans with kitchen shears, the ends rolling away, little green lizard tails. I cut away each word like a long bean, glugging the G down the drain. My mother said it was going to be long. My grandmother said it was going to be long. Going out the door, always late for work, shirt inside out, said go on and bounce a howling baby. My mother, me at all, while skimming oxtail broth. The fat sheen of look how well we eat in this country, lest you forget it was worth it, lest you forget the dilation of the cervix going, the contractions going, the grip, the placenta, the shit, the vernix, the garbled life going, the soft flashlight eyes, the milk, the teeth, the nails, the hand on heart, the soup coagulating on the stove. You must go, for what gleams in the dark turns to look at you. Remember this, the work and the after work, and the work of being perceived as not doing enough work, though you are working well over enough. Will this ever be enough? When is enough enough? The chorus now, not until the knots of fat melt in this walk, not until you have nothing left but this suet, this smear of high heat lineage gleaming in the gloaming, and it is yours, and it is mine, and it is our dream daughters, and it will last longer than you will ever believe us. So yay, thanks. I'm gonna stop share from within the void. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to you for conversation. I'm going to make Hannah the host again. Okay.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Nick.
So I want to, like Jane said, I want to open up the floor to questions, observations, things that people were thinking when they were reading through the book this last couple weeks.
I can go first if people are still thinking. I guess it's kind of an observation, kind of a question, but
Yeah.
I just thought there was a really beautiful passage on page 41. It's in a poem that isn't named, but it's when you were in the Pacific Northwest and you found two deer that stare at you and their antlers are reaching towards the moon and they have like slugs coming out of their mouth. And I just saw many mentions throughout the entire book of animals that have been contaminated or poisoned or, you know, the toxic borers. And I just was wondering if you felt like a deep connection to animals in nature and if that like spoke deeper truths to you, if you like learned something about coming to, you know, the Pacific Northwest and observing your surroundings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that question. You know, it's so funny. You know, thank you so much for that question. When I wrote Overpour, my first book, as someone asked me, is like, what's with all the animals in your book? And I was like, what animals? And I was like, oh. And I was like, I don't know why I didn't realize I had so many animals, pretty much an animal, at least in every single poem. But I think you're right about the contaminated animals. I think you're right. The toxic borers, something sickly, something's not quite right. And it's interesting too, because like, I think about on many levels, like people ask me like, what is this book about? And it's about fear. I mean, at its very core, but also included in that, in thinking about, you know, family and thinking about, you know, racialized and sexualized violence. Like there's also like climate fear. Like, and I think that that's something that's not like overtly, like the book is overtly doing, but you're kind of noticing too, is like, there's a lot of climate disaster here. There's a lot that the animals are not doing so hot. And you know, this is a space of degradation. This is a space of something uneasy. And then thinking about that always in terms of ecologies. I just taught actually a radical eco-poetics class, my graduate class. And, you know, we were talking about Camille Dungy's essay, is all writing, environmental writing. It's a fantastic essay. And yeah, she, you know, posits that it is like everything, every part of us, you know, is the environment. And that includes so everything in this book and including the animals. And in this scene in particular, the deer, and that just kind of, I think about the ways in which the past to me is not the past. Like it is right in my face right now. And so there are times when I walk around and I see, you know, the deer, or I see, you know, the geese, that are so many geese that just like shit all over, you know, everyone's yard here. And it's like, oh, if I could go back in time and like feed my family like one of these like geese here, and or a deer, like how fed they would, how happy and how like nourished they would be, you know. I think about that a lot. Even though my mother didn't grow up during the Great Leap Forward, she grew up during the Cultural Revolution. And of course, if you can imagine, it's like after such massive starvation and massive you know, lack of food, hunger, my mom grew up, you know, only really eating some vegetables. And so just you know, in one of these poems too, she says that she grew up vegetarian, and it's just so funny because she was talking to an ex of mine about being vegetarian, and it's like, well, his was a choice, and you know, hers was not. And just thinking about, you know, some of these animals that come up here, like I just want to feed give them that protein. And the eggs, there's a lot of eggs in relationship to the animals in here too. So thank you for that question. So I don't know. I do feel like something very tied to the animal world, especially rats. Like, I mean, as I mentioned, it's like Born in the Year of the Rat, and there's just something that I feel like animals know so much more than we do. So, and you know, obviously they're in danger as much as we are too, but we're harming them. So, yeah, there's also fear of climate change, absolutely, in the book. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, more questions or thoughts?
I'll go ahead, Katie.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Michael. Um, Jane, thank you so much for coming to read for us. It's really a pleasure, and your work is so beautiful. So thank you. Yeah, my question has to do with kind of what you touched on in the beginning of your reading about the emotions that fuel your poems. I noticed the theme of, well, fear and rage and also loneliness, and all of those are such strong and potent emotions. And so I'm just curious, like, how you come to the page with all of those and how you're able to wrestle with them and how they interact as you work on your craft.
Oh, I love that question. Feelings. You know, it's so funny. Nick knew me at Iowa when we went to grad school together. And I would say that my poems at Iowa didn't really have many feelings, like it wasn't felt. And I don't know why I was trying to kind of run away from writing about these emotions. And I mean, I think a lot of it was just like a fear of like, I mean, it's vulnerable, I think, to do this. This is by far so much more vulnerable than my first book. And I am a little terrified, right? Speaking of which, to have this in the world in many ways. But, you know, when it comes to coming at it to the page, you know, craft-wise, you know, the kind of raw material of emotion is something that for me, can't be translated onto the page. It is, you know, the time when you're just like ugly crying and that's it. Like there's nothing, you can't make that pretty. You can't put that into a metaphor. Those moments where you're just like so angry or just so sad or so lonely, right? Or just even so joyful. Like it's so hard to put into words. But yet at the same time, I feel like there is, for me as a poet, there's a lot of joy in trying to kind of get as close as possible without knowing that I can never get there. It's kind of like I mentioned the asymptotes in the Everything poem, but I know we'll never touch the axis, but I know that I can try to get as nose close to trying to share how that thing felt and being as kind of like, I guess, blatant as possible. I mean, there's another line in one of the poems where I'm so lonely and heartbroken. There's a lot of heartbreak in this book too, but it's like, you know, like holding lettuce the way I do in the grocery store, like how sad, like, you know, someone's just like hugging lettuce to have some affection in the grocery store. And like, you know, to me, I feel like there is, as much as there is, you know, me sharing that, there's also a little humor. I hope there's like little moments of like, oh, that's a little ridiculous. Or even the opossum like holding like its hand up, wanting to touch my hand. Like there's something slightly surreal. And so for me, I think when these raw emotions are transformed into something that feels like charged, that's that kind of getting close as possible. But I can never say that ever replicates. I'm never trying to actually like do those feelings on the page. It's just trying to get close to better understand them, maybe. I think form helps me a lot through that too. I feel like, especially in the long labors, my anger and exhaustion for constantly having to prove my worth. And, you know, I just went through the tenure system and just so how angry I was. when I went through tenure. It's just like I needed to write the long poem to get that across. So thank you for those questions. It is a vulnerable task, I think, to be a poet, and something I didn't really get to until much later in my career, actually. Is like for many years, I was afraid to write really with my I voice. My poems in Iowa rarely had a speaker, and then that all changed after I left Iowa. So yeah, thank you for that question. It's a hard one, right? It's like, how do you can't teach emotional weight. You can't teach, I mean, to think about duende, but it's like, what, you can't call for duende, you can't, you know, but you can try to, you can at least do the joy of trying to get nose close, I guess, to that feeling. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Jane. Thank you so much for being here. I want to ask you a question about like a process related question as it pertains to how you approach like the line. And I'll reference the poem The Egg on 63, and a line that really hit me hard was that whimpering bridge. So we go, a chicken's neck down with thin branch arms and struck its neck, that whimpering bridge from brain to heart. And so my question is, and by the time I had gotten to that point in the book, and I really enjoy how you said, like, it gave me a lot of hope as a writer when you said earlier that you kind of like don't agree with having to constantly like go away from, you know, things that are core and like identifiable to us. And it's more like an embracing and like a reclamation. I felt that in this book. But by the time I got to this point in your book, I could tell there was such a heavy presence of theme and so many different themes that you were working with. And I'm curious, one thing Nick really tries to help us with and teach us is really kind of how to free our language at the level of line. And I was curious in how you kind of unburden yourself from everything that's going on with the book, and to be able to focus on line and excite yourself and surprise yourself. Yeah, how do you do that?
I love that question, and I love that Nick is here because I learned line breaks from Nick. It's just straight up, directly, that dude. I didn't know how to break lines. I wrote prose poems only when I came to Iowa. I was actually a fiction writer that just like decided to apply to Iowa on a whim in poetry. So actually, I actually got into fiction. I was going to do an M.F.A. in fiction. So I didn't know how to break lines at all. And so, I had a lot of conversations with Nick about line breaks and line units and the breath, right? And thinking about also tension and thinking about that last word on the line and the first word and also, space breaks. I was obsessed. I'm still obsessed with space breaks and how they operate so differently from the kind of sharpness, the cleaver of the line break. And it feels almost like one of those, like, I don't know, like clouds that you hop on. I'm like blanking on the Nintendo game that I'm thinking about. Mario. anyway, it just feels like, it just like, for me, the space break feels like a hopping over a very kind of resonant hop of sorts. But yeah, and this line too is just like, in thinking about, for me, the line breaks, the form really, I always want it to feel as if there is like a doubling or something else is happening, right? Like that long dash after that moment, that whimpering bridge, that teeteringness sometimes that a line break can offer us. That to me always feels important. I never begin actually with line breaks. I actually just write a prose block usually when I write in terms of my process. And then, it is very freeing. I go back and I just break, and it just, like, the whole poem opens up and it becomes something than just, like, I don't know, words on a page. And so I really love that you're kind of, speaking to that. I was even thinking in the poem, after preparing the altar that goes feverishly, the kind of space breaks in that particular poem, a reader told me that it looks kind of like an eel is moving through it. Like an eel can swim through, kind of like almost like dive in and out of like those space breaks. And I really love that. I've been thinking a lot about form in terms of shape a lot. And that comes from my friend Sumita Chakraborty's essay, The Shape of Things. And she talks about shape and that there is something, you know, when you look at a shape of a poem on a page, it already elicits an experience, a feeling, and so does a line. So does a line unit, and that to me is so magical. It's like the poem is transformed from that raw first draft material into something that has tension, that has, you know, breath and has weight in these ways. You know, so thank you for that question about line breaks. I still am enamored by them and still learning from them, but I'm glad that Nick is really kind of pushing you towards the line break, because it is something that really can, I think, you know, you think about like, I can't speak French at all, but like even thinking about the word enjambment and like where that word comes from, and thinking about it being to leg over or to leg under, I can't remember, but I just love the idea of the leg kind of kicking under, and just the way in which that when you come to the end of a line, you're on a precipice, like you don't know where the hell you're going next. And that is a great feeling as a reader. And so it's like, you're always suspended. Every line break is a suspension. Yeah, I love line breaks now. I have not since 2008 written a single piece of fiction. So I'm out of fiction since then. Like I was like, the line break got me and now I'm done. That said, I do like prose and nonfiction, and I'm writing a memoir, so I guess I'm coming back to that. But maybe I feel like it'll be a lot to kind of maybe ask my editor for allow me some line breaks, but in a memoir, but we'll see. But yeah, thanks for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you raising your hand? Is that what that is?
Yeah, hi, I'm raising.
I'm not, I don't understand. Why.
Yes, raised hands. Yes.
Okay, I don't know if we're supposed to be both polite, but hi Jane. I'm Lede.
Hi, Lede.
My question is about the cactus, or just notes on. I'm sorry. There are some notes on that poem on page 20.
Yeah.
So I guess these are like more selfish questions, but so like to bring up a few points, I thought that this poem, I don't know, I think that this poem was kind of like, well, it stood out to me because I thought it was about perception and like perceiving things, and like the concept of like seeing new things, but in the same way. And I know a couple of classes ago, I take Nick's poetry writing workshop, and I think I asked him a couple of classes ago, I'm like, Nick, okay, so how do you like write new interesting things, even though like everyone has written like basically everything? And I forgot his answer. Nick, maybe you can answer, but so I thought about that a little bit, and I wanted to get back to perception, and I just wanted to know, what were you thinking in this poem? Because the opening line really strike me. I never planned on being weak, and what I think that this poem stood out to me because like I'm going through a lot of stressors, and I'm like realizing, okay, maybe perhaps I am stronger than the things around me and my issues, and like, okay, perhaps like not, and I'm kind of like totally ratting myself out, but like not emailing my professors, hey, I'm not gonna be in class because I'm too stressed, right? I'm trying something new as far as, okay, I'm facing this stress, okay, I'm gonna have to get through it some way. So I might as well just do it and not give up. So I saw a lot of that in this. Lines like, I never planned on being weak. I thought of myself as a cactus, flooded with sun and armor that could strike an armor. I like, to me, that's like strength in that sentence. Like, yes, you are the sun, you are armor. You're able to like withstand, you know, the things that come at you. And then here at this gutting hour, I ask myself, what have you done? Do you even know? And like, I'm also in Barrett's class. Barrett, I forgot which class you're teaching, but I'm also in this class, and the essay that I turned in was also about like, okay, so what have I done with my life, right? Basically, like trying to figure these things out, and I saw a lot of that in this, and then my last line that really was poignant, and I wanted to speak on was okay, I'm gonna read the exhaustion ad infinitum. Throw everything you know into the ocean and watch it come back differently to you. Watch it come back to you differently. I really thought that was the star thing, because I feel like there's an element of trust in there, and I think like my trusting a lot of things in my life, like, you know, my trust has been broken, you know. So I think that spoke to me, where it's like, okay, so in the end, you still, perhaps you can learn how to trust that things are capable of like returning back to you. Perhaps maybe looking the same, but with, you know, physically the same, or but like spiritually, you know, different, or vice versa. And I just wanted to know what you were thinking. Like, were you in the headspace that I'm thinking? Oh, were you in my headspace, or were you in a completely different headspace, or like just what were you thinking writing The Cactus? It's a really beautiful poem. Thank you for writing. Okay, I'm done.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Lede, thank you so much for that. That was like a 6-page like thesis on this poem. And I just I feel really honored that you did such a deep dive into The Cactus. And it's such a poem that I actually, I kept going back and forth whether or not to put it in the book. So it really means a lot, because I was like unsure about this poem, but to hear you talk about it, it really speaks to a lot of the things that you're already kind of suggesting. I love your points about perception and about this idea of like strength, and then like what happens when you realize like, wait a second, that idea of strength is actually corrosive, that, you know, the idea that I have to be strong every single second of the day, and then what happens when I'm not, and then what have you done, like, do you even know? And the opening line, I've never planned on being weak, it reminds me too of another poem, the Lessons on Lessening, and it's like, no one ever told me I'd have to be polite. And it's this feeling of just kind of recognizing that there is some kind of, at least for me, knowing that there's something very deeply powerful about myself. And I can feel that in the opening poem, Mad, too, in many ways. But at the same time, like, even if one sees oneself as the cactus, like, what does it mean when the armor is plucked? Like, how vulgar, a naked porcupine, that vulnerability when one is so at one's most vulnerable, most naked, most embarrassed, most heartbroken, most questioning, I suppose, what to do then. Like, even the deer are not looking at me when I'm in that moment of just like, I don't know, like not knowing what I'm, you know, what the next step is. But yet there is, you're right, at the end of the poem, there is that turn of like, you know, I lugged out my terror, the exhaustion ad infinitum, throw everything you know into the ocean and watch it come back to you different. Like, there is, I think, even in the recognition of strength and the impossibility of that, I guess, continual strength, right? Because almost like you need a rest from that strength, like the constant, I think, like, I've been hearing this like term recently of toxic positivity, of like, you know, keep going. You're like, what? I can't, like, you know. And I think that this poem really speaks to that, like, I can't. And even in Lessons on Lessening, that the loneliness, you know, that when you were talking about earlier, it's just like, I just can't. And interestingly, at the end of that poem, I actually speak to my younger self. Like, I feel like my younger self, my child self, I think it has the answers to some degree. And I don't know why, but in many ways, it's like knowing that the ocean, the waves will come back. I mean, it's going to come back to me. You know, it's in, I mean, I don't know. I actually came into the Zoom and I came into a conversation of like, is it going to be okay? And I was like, yes. And I think that the cactus, I think, does that in many ways too. But I don't have the answers. It's like, what have you done? Do you even know? But I do know that it's gonna come back. Like whatever it is, my quills, so to speak, my armor, but also that I have to know that the armor will be plucked. And so, yeah, I mean, thank you for that. Thank you for those comments about this poem. I think, this one is a hard one. It's sometimes easier to talk about the poems that are about, direct history and a direct family. And this one, when you're looking at a poem that is more kind of thinking about, heartache and also failure at its core. I mean, this book also talks a lot about failure. That I hope that comes across. So thank you for that, and for reading The Cactus, the poem that almost didn't make it into the book. So yeah, thanks.
Yes, Hannah, did you all have any questions?
Yeah, I have one. This is less less refined than the questions that my peers ask, but I was wondering if your family reads your poems. And yeah, like, what does it mean for you, like, writing about them? So yeah, and your poems are wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Hannah. That's a very refined question. It's a very big question. How do I word this exactly? I am able to write the things I'm able to write because they don't read them. And so in many ways, the language barrier allows me a lot of freedom in terms of that vulnerability. Specifically my father, who's not in my life, but it's like I feel, I know he's not going to find my work. My family doesn't read my work. My brother could. He is not interested, but that's cool. My mom is actually quite curious about my work. There is a language barrier, there is access barrier, but she is, I don't know who got her on Instagram, but she's on Instagram now, and she only follows like me and some of my cousins. But she will try to read. If I post something, she'll try to read it. And sometimes she'll talk to her coworkers, and my mom is super fluent verbally. Like, she can talk. She's also super extroverted and will just talk your ear off. Like, she's that person, but she's not as so on the page, or like in terms of reading her English skills. So it's really interesting that, like, she'll talk to her coworkers about a poem, and then in their conversation, she'll understand the poem. She'll be like, she only likes the ones where she's in it, which is, she's in it a lot. So she's just very like, that's kind of what she wants, is that she just wants the ones about her. So she likes them. So yeah, but other than that, no one ever reads my poems. I've been trying to get my cousins to come like to a reading. I mean, I'm on tour, like, I'm just like, no. They're like, no, thanks. They're too cool for school. They're like college aged and like high school aged. And so they're much younger than me, because my mom had me when she was very young. But I just think that's so funny. But yeah, no. And so I have a lot of freedom, like a lot. And thank goodness, because I'd be utterly terrified, I think, if I knew that my family was reading this. Terrifying. Also, like, I thought about this, and this is a lot of this book is censored. It would be censored in China. And so even just knowing that fact of like writing about something that would be banned in China, anything about the Great Leap Forward is banned. That's also complicated, because I don't know how I would feel about going to visit, years later, to China. And they've got watchful eyes on artists in particular, and poets. So I always think about that. We think about poetry as like, oh, it's you know, something that you study or will, it's like, no, it's like real stakes in other countries. Like there are poets under house arrest in China right now. So so I think about that. That's a related maybe point to what you're saying, but and thinking about who's reading my work. But thank you for that. So yeah, the answer is my mom, question mark. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question and also a comment. Just to start, sort of leading into my question, I think it's a pretty stressful time, I think, for a lot of people right now. Obviously, goes without saying, I've gotten like 9 hours of sleep since Sunday, and I've been really stressed out. But I think it's just nice that like picking up this book has made me, you know, I was in a moment like a couple days ago where I was writing an essay at like 4 a.m. and I was stressing myself out, and I just picked up your book and read. I put on my fur coat for like the 10th time, and it calmed me down and made me, you know, just have a moment to reflect. And I think that's a, you know, just a nice thing to be able to get from you. So I appreciate that. I also have a question regarding the poem on sort of, I think it's a difficult question that I wouldn't be able to answer if someone prompted to me, but in some of your poems, I put on my fur coat being an example, a line I read gives me the impression that it's where the poem started from in a way. Like, am I the only animal here? The final line of the poem is so like impactful that it gave me the impression that the idea almost started there and built outward from it. So I guess my question is, in general, is there a place your poems usually start from, or how does the process of, how does the idea start and build to create a poem?
Yeah, thank you so much. First, thank you for, you know, sharing that too. And wow, that's like the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me, and thinking about finding solace in poetry. And I feel the same way too. I pick up like books of poems by fellow poets, and I'm just like, wow, like if I was having a really shitty day, it's like, and all the like deadlines, all the emails, all of that junk, that a poem operates on a completely different time and space level. Like it's like the whole structure of our day-to-day lives disappears. So thank you for that, for saying that, and for sharing that with me. And to give a shout out to, I put on my fur coat, which is actually one of my personal favorites in the collection, because it makes me smile whenever I think about this poem. Even though, you know, it's a, you know, it's a complicated poem. It's in my mother's voice. Speaking of my mom, I think it's the only one in her voice in the book. And in many ways too, that how I love the question about like the starts and the ends of poems. And I actually did not know I was going to get to that ending in that particular poem. I actually started it with doing the actual thing. Like I mentioned, I've been very interested in like, I don't know what to call it, participatory poetry, or just like doing something for a poem to happen. And so I actually, when I was home in Jersey, my mom has this fur coat that when she first got her paycheck at the restaurant, she did not save that money. She did not use on groceries. She did not do anything except buy this fancy coat for herself, which she should have, right? Not practical at all. But she wanted this coat. And so she spent all the money on it. And so I went home and I put on the coat. And then I wrote this poem. And so you know, for me, I think like being a writer is never about just sitting there and just like, I'm gonna write a poem today. Like that never happens to me. I don't know if that ever happens to you, but it doesn't happen to me. So it's always something that I have to either do, or something happens to me and I have to go write a poem. And so for me, the start of the poem is like, I have to enact it. I have to do something. I don't know what, sometimes it's taking a walk. Sometimes it's quite simple. And I see something while I'm walking and I'm like, oh, I have to write a poem. And sometimes it's like putting on my mom's coat. or making a soup or something that I feel is tied to the poem, maybe that I'm thinking about, but I haven't written it. And I had that poem is like, I talk a lot in my classes about the volta, or the turn in the poem, when something turns to a place you didn't expect. And for me in that poem, I did not know I was going to get to the mighty only animal here. And it shocked me when I got there, in a very good way. I was like, oh, like, that's pretty startling. And I knew, I was like, oh, I had in my mind I was going to write more, but I had to stop. Like, I was like, no, this is it. This is the end. That hasn't happened all the time. I feel like every single poem has a different process of beginning or ending. But for that one in particular, it feels almost like I started there, like you said, because it's so, like, for me, like, it was a shock when I got there. So it is very a striking ending. But I didn't know I was going to get there. And sometimes for me, writing a poem is like allowing you to let go of where you think this poem is going to go. It's like the ending. For me, endings work best when I'm not thinking about them. Like, I'm not even trying to end this poem. I wasn't. I just I kept writing, and I was like, actually, I need to stop. And so that's, the hardest thing is beginning, really. And the ending, I sometimes trust. I just trust it. And sometimes the ending, if it doesn't feel right, I just have to keep writing. And I always believe, I was just talking about this, it's kind of a metaphor earlier today. I was talking about this idea of the ocean floor. When they discovered there was more ocean floor under the ocean floor, and everyone's like, wait, what? I think it's called the abyssal plain or something. But it's like, there is an ending to your poem, and then there might be another, and you don't know it until you write it. But this one ended early. This one was like, this is it. And I was like, okay, I won't touch it. But I had to do something to make this poem happen. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. So I had to put the coat on. So yeah, thanks for that shout out for that poem. And yeah, I highly recommend, doing, I don't know, like, if something, you want to write a poem about something, sometimes it helps to kind of surround yourself with the stuff that you're thinking about in the poem. So I don't know. Yeah. So the coat. Yeah. Thanks for that.
It's been about an hour and a half almost. I know you still have a day or an evening or whatever ahead of you. But I just want to thank you for coming. I mean, you're my oldest poet friend. Like, you've taught me more about poems than anyone has, and at least half of what I'm able to teach my students is because we went to school together. So thank you for talking to my students. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Nick. This has been such a joy of my week. I will say your questions, your comments have just stunned me, like, just really incredible reading and thoughtful questions. And I only wish that, I could hang out even more and get snacks or something afterwards. But it's been such a joy. Thank you for just the care you took with the poems. I think, as all of you are writers, it means a lot. I think when you think about a poem as a gift, like, it is something that you are deciding to share, right? It's not just a given that it's out there. And as I mentioned, this is the most vulnerable kind of book maybe tonight and like say it's going to be even more like like what am I doing sharing this stuff? And in prose, I will say it gives me more room to do some of this deeper questioning. But I hope that book is funny. It's actually, my goofy self comes out more in memoir writing. I like to write laughing, so in that way with memoir. But anyhow, it's just been such a joy. And Nick too is one of my oldest trusted poem friends, readers. And you should be all so grateful to have such a fantastic professor. And not all poets are good teachers. Nick is great. I think I am too. So I will say that it's like, I'm mad when someone gives me 4 stars. I'm like, what? Where's the 5? It doesn't happen often, but you know, we learn from you all. You learn from, you know, each other. I mean, that's the best part about writing, is like there is no student teacher divide. I mean, everybody is a practicing poet. Everyone practices. Nick and I and every poet I know comes to the page with that horrible feeling of what the fuck am, oh, sorry, Mike's, oh my god, what am I gonna do right now? But it always happens. The poem always happens, which is cool. So sorry for cursing.
All right, thank you, Jane. Have a good night.
Thank you.
I'll hit you up for some information, probably email tomorrow. So keep an eye out.
That's great. Yes. And thank you again to Hannah for that gorgeous introduction. And thank you all for being here on a Wednesday night, and from Washington to Wisconsin. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And I hope you all reach out somehow, and hope to see you. I was like, I don't know where, but like, you know, it's just been a joy. So thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jane. Thank you so
Jane.
much, Jane.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, all of you too.
Bye.
See
Yep.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Tomorrow.
Good night, everyone.
All right. Good night.